Happy Friday to everybody. I'm sure it's been a long week, and we're going to wind it down with some training, and you'll learn how to, as an approver, approve bills in Bill.com today. So I'm currently presenting my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. If you can't, please say so now. I'm going to log in, and if there's anybody on this call that has not received a notification to Bill.com to log in and have your own sign-on, you can speak up now, and we will, Nisha or I will get with you after this call, and we'll take care of that for you. So hopefully everyone on this call has had the ability to sign in and access their Bill.com account or the Bill.com account of Phoenix House. Okay, so I'm going to sign on. And when you sign on, you will see Phoenix House. But because we're signed on as me, you're going to see a few other ones. For the purpose of training today, we're going to work in the training account, so we don't mess with any work that's going on within the Phoenix House account. So when you sign in, it takes you to an overview screen. And on here, you will see your to-do list. And in the to-do list, you will have a notification here if you have any bills to approve. And so right now it says I have 5 bills to approve. So we're going to go in and start the process of approving bills. There are several different ways you can approve bills, but the preferred way is to use the slideshow approval. And this will bring up our first invoice to review and approve. So the first box that pops up is the information as it was entered into Bill.com. And so you can take and compare this information to the invoice that's attached to the summary bill. Every bill will have an attachment of the documentation that the AP processor used to create this bill in Bill.com to be approved. So as you see here, looking to the left on the document, there is 1 or 2 pages. So there's 2 pages here. So if it was only 1 page, it would say page 1 of 1 or 1 of 5. So here's all the documentation, and you can just click on the arrows left to right to see the information, so that you want to verify that what has been entered here on the screen is in line with what is on the check request that the AP processor received when entering the information. Now there's a couple different ways you can look at this information. You can always minimize this box if you want to have a bigger view of the invoice, or you can click on Open Document. It will come to the drop down to the bottom, and then you can take and pull this tab over. You can print it out, or I wouldn't suggest that. I would say that you can pull this over to your second screen and have to be able to look at this invoice with the summary screen. Or you can do it this way and then just click back here and open it back up. So once you compare the information, you want to make sure that the account number matches what's on the check request. And if the information is not on this, you would look on obviously on either page to see where the information is listed. Your department number is right here, 410-2005. You find that right here. And then the class is also listed. right here. The amount, $4,250. And if you scroll up, you can see the amount, the date that was used, the invoice number. Here's the date. So the information that you'll need will be on this form. So once you're able to verify all the information is correct, you're ready to approve. So first, let's look at the approvers. What we have here is this. There's two approvers to this bill. So the first person was Susie Colbert. I'm sorry? Okay. The first approver is Susie Colburn, and so she has already approved. And so once she approves the bill, it will roll to the next person, and it will say waiting, is where you see it is now, because it's waiting on me to approve the bill. And once I approve the bill, it will move to the next person, depending on how many approvers that we list. So before I talk more about that, I'm going to pause a minute to see if anybody has any questions about what we've learned so far or how we got to where we're at. Please just remember to unmute your phone at the bottom by clicking on the mic, and that'll give you the opportunity to ask a question. We'll wait just a couple more minutes.
Can you show where you started?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to cancel here. And so we were on the home page, the overview page, and from the to-do list, it says that I have 5 bills to approve. So I click on the approve 5 bills, and then I click on slide show approval. And you see the 5 invoices here, but again, the best recommended way to do this is the slide show approval. That's the preferred method. It's the easiest. So once you click on that, your first bill to review and approve is here. So again, we're going to look at the information on this approved bill and make sure that it coincides with the bill to the left. All right.
Terry, I just wanted to add one thing
Sure.
about the approver list.
Mm-hmm.
So we have worked with Susan Shubatowski, Susan Hargraves, and Anthony Murata to actually predefine approver queues based on company, cost code, and invoice amount. So as BDO processes this invoice that comes through Bill.com, we will establish the approver queues based on the approval chains that have been agreed with Phoenix House, and then route the invoice for approval. So we already know who the approvers are, and so as Terry was mentioning earlier, depending on the company code, the cost code, and the invoice amount, you may see 1 or 2 approvers in a queue, or you may see more than that in a queue. And as you get the invoice in your queue to approve, you may have approvers after you, and you may have had people that approve before you, and that will be visible in that approver queue list on the screen that Terry is just showing. So just wanted to let you all know that. All right, Terry, back to you.
Go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Does Bill.com provide an email to us when an approval is needed?
Okay, and do you want to ask your second question also, or do you want me to answer that first?
I'll do that first.
Okay, so Bill.com does have the ability to send notifications out to approvers when there is something in your queue to approve, and essentially that would come by way of an email. However, that approval notification or that notification is currently turned off because it is tied to a denial notification, which goes out to all approvers when any approver denies an invoice in their queue. And what we found when we turned on these approval queues initially for Phoenix House, that those denial notifications were actually causing some confusion among the approvers because they were getting denial notifications for invoices that they had not denied. So we have a feature request into Bill.com to separate an approval notification from a denial notification. And once that's done, we will turn the notification back on. So for now, it's turned off. However, if people feel like that's not going to bother them and that they can just ignore the denial notifications that come through, we're happy to turn on the approval notification for you now. But just know that you will also get all denied notifications, whether they apply to your invoice, your company, your project, your queue, or not. So what we've been recommending at this point is that people get into the habit of logging into Bill.com at least once or twice a day, maybe the start of the day, mid-afternoon, and just go to that overview page, because if you do have invoices in your queue to approve, it'll show right there. You don't actually have to click on it. You don't actually have to go into slideshow approval. All you really have to do is go to this overview page, and you'll know right away if you've got invoices in your queue or not. So that's what we're recommending for now. But again, if anybody feels very strongly about having that notification turned on, please send me an email. My name is nshoop@bdo.com. My first name is Nisha, and we'll be happy to turn that on for you. I will also add that the amount of mail you start getting from Bill.com can become quite excessive. So again, that's something a lot of people don't really like, which is why it's one more reason we haven't turned these queues on. Okay, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. My second question, if in reviewing the invoice there is a mistake, how do we correct that?
Yeah, so we're going to go through that in a minute. So what Terry's going to walk you through first is how you approve an invoice. And then the second thing she's going to walk you through is how you deny an invoice specifically for the kind of situation that you've just described. So if we maybe just go through that training, we'll cover that.
Okay, so we'll move along. So we've looked over this invoice and we say that it's good, so we are going to approve it. So we'll click approve. Now it brings up the next invoice. Same process. We're going to look at this information in the summary box, and we're going to compare it to the documents behind it that we received. And so, again, you can move left to right on these documents and go through the process to verify the information. You check the date, invoice number, typical information that's here, the amounts, and this time we have 3 approvers on this bill. So again, Susie's approved it. She's waiting on me, and then it shows Nisha as upcoming. So once I approve this bill, then it'll roll again to Nisha so that she can look, review, and approve this bill. But I'm going to pretend that there's something, out of order on this bill. So I'm going to make a note before I deny this bill. I'm going to say that the amount of the invoice does not match the check request. So that and I'm going to spell these words right, and so when this information goes back to the AP processor, she doesn't have to guess why I'm denied the bill. I have a note here that says, the reason why I'm not approving this bill, and then why it's being denied. So the next step is simply to click on deny and deny this bill. So that removes it out of your queue and into the AP processor's queue. So I'm just going to take a quick break here and show you here on the home screen that now you have 4 bills to approve. So we've approved one, we've denied one, and so it's just now catching up with us. We now have 3 left. So we started with 5.
Okay. So Terry, could I add something there, please?
Sure, please do.
So to the person that asked the questions, effectively what happens when you deny a bill is bill goes back to the AP processor that initially coded the bill for them to fix whatever the problem is on that bill and then resubmit it through the entire approval queue. So in the example that Terry just showed, I was the 3rd approver after her, but because she denied the bill, that bill would never come to me for approval until such time as it was fixed and resubmitted through the queue. And the reason we do that is that any change that is made on an invoice, whether it's the amount or the coding or something else, people that have approved that bill prior to the person that denies it need to also have an opportunity to know what change was made, because their approval actually constitutes their their acceptance of the charge. And so they need to be able to reapprove it with the change. And so the process is you deny it if you find something wrong on it. Please make sure you put a note in so that the processor can understand what was wrong with it and make the fix appropriately. And then the processor will resubmit it through the queue so that everybody in the queue has a chance to note and see what that change was and reapprove it based on that change.
So I'll pause here a minute to see if anybody has any other questions or comments about the denial process. Okay, so the next step is go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, thought someone had a question. All right, so the next invoice we're going to look at, same process. We're going to compare the invoice, the summary screen with the invoice and the information. On this particular one, after reviewing it, I'm kind of undecided about the department number. I'm really not sure if this is the correct department number. Of course, I'm making this up just for the training process. So for the one for the $2,096.95, I'm just not sure if that's the correct department code. But it's not something I want to deny because I don't know that it's incorrect. But it's just something I want to go maybe ask another coworker about. Maybe I want to find out some more information for it. So right now, I do not want to approve this invoice. So I'm going to skip it until I can ask and find out a little more information about this. So when I skip this invoice, I just simply skip it. It takes it out of the line, and it doesn't go away. It just puts it back in the waiting process for me to do my research to feel comfortable with review. Of course, you don't want to let something sit out there a long, long time. If you have some review or questions about it, you'll want to do that relatively quickly because some of these invoices will have several people on there. So you want to try to keep this, as Nisha mentioned earlier on, keep these invoices moving through the approval process. But, please do spend time to verify this information and not just breeze through it and say, yeah, I approve it. I'm sure you wouldn't do that, but just, just to be clear.
Right. So essentially skipping the invoice still leaves it in your queue. It just allows you to finish processing anything else that's in your queue. And then the invoice that you've skipped will redisplay itself and wait for you to make a decision on it. So skipping an invoice does not actually move the invoice out of your queue. It just pushes it to the back of the queue so you can work through other invoices in your queue. And the invoice will remain in your queue until you choose to approve it or deny it. Only the act of approval or denial actually causes the invoice to move out of your queue into the next approver's queue or into what we call a fully approved status. An invoice can only be paid after it is fully approved. Therefore, as Terry mentioned earlier, it is really important that you make a habit of checking your queues at least once or twice a day to make sure that things are moving through, because a lot of your invoices do have due dates that we want to make sure we're paying by. And with this process, if an invoice is waiting in somebody's queue and they don't approve it in a timely manner, it will delay the payment process.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, we are on our next invoice. So we've learned how to...
This is Tom Lee. I got one quick question for you.
Sure.
Just to help expedite the approval of all these invoices, and maybe not so much today, but in the near future, when do you write the checks out? What
So
day
that
are you going to...
So with Bill.com, unlike the process that Phoenix House AP followed, where checks were cut once a week,
Right.
in Bill.com, we have the ability to schedule invoices for payment every day. Because Bill.com actually cuts the checks on our behalf. So there is no actual physical need to aggregate all invoices and then run a single batch to print out all the checks you need for that week. So we actually have the ability to schedule invoices every day for payment, and we do, because we are constantly looking at the approved invoices queue, and anything that comes through approved that has an upcoming due date or a past due date is scheduled immediately for payment. So that does differ a little bit, and actually what this gives us is more flexibility now, because I don't have to wait till a Wednesday or a Friday or a Thursday or the following week to actually pay anything. Stuff can be paid right away. It just can't be paid until it gets fully approved.
Okay, but is there a main day that you are going to be writing checks, or just...
So typically, if we have to cut local checks, and what I mean by local checks are checks that are printed locally at the Phoenix House office, similar to the process that Lillian had, you know, for things that we can't use Bill.com for, or for things like, say, a license renewal, where the check actually has to accompany the license form. Those typically are done every Wednesday. But otherwise, for everything else, we pretty much schedule every day to be paid.
Okay. That helps.
You're welcome.
Okay, Nisha, also, I'd like to, before we get moving on this, I'd like for you to speak with them about the blank page, why we use a blank page for Phoenix House.
Sure. So let me just go ahead and explain this next invoice, right? So, Terry, would you mind minimizing that coding screen so folks can see it?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And there we go. So now you notice that the next invoice came up in Terry's queue, and the first page is absolutely blank. That's not because the invoice is actually missing. Sometimes we get invoices that have things handwritten on them. They may be either internal notes on an invoice that a region has made, or there may be some other information that we don't particularly want to have print with the check that goes out from Bill.com. So typically, Bill.com will take the first page of your invoice and print that on the check stub as the indicator of the invoice for which that particular check is for. And when we want to suppress that printing because there's either some paperwork or handwriting or something on there that we don't want to have printed, we insert a blank page as the first page of the invoice document. Now you'll notice that this particular invoice document has 3 pages and the first page is blank. But if you clicked on the second page, so Terry, could I ask you to maybe click on page 2? Thank you. There you see is the check request that came with the invoice. And then if you click on page 3, there's the actual invoice itself. So the documentation is always going to be there. If you see a blank page, don't assume that the invoice is missing. We actually had a client that somebody from the client's office called us and said, hey, we opened this up in bill.com and the invoice is missing. It actually wasn't. They were just looking at the blank page and forgot to click through all the other pages. So when you do encounter a blank page, just make sure that you click to page 2 or page 3. The invoice document will be there, but the blank page has been inserted to suppress printing of any invoice information along with the check. Any questions? You're welcome. Any questions about that? Okay. Thanks.
All right. So we're going to open up our document and compare it to the invoice check request and make sure all the information there. The date is 6/8. We see right here on the invoice date, 6/8, the invoice number right here. And we see that here on the check request. That matches, and then the amount of $167.78. And then we will review at the bottom, the company code, the account number, and the class. So the class is 52, and the account number, which is the department number. And then you have the account number here. I just took a few minutes to go over that because I didn't really point that out on earlier ones. So there's all your information. And so when everything looks good, we will approve this invoice. I think we have one more. So just verifying this information, 13/20, the invoice date. Let me minimize it here so I can see it. 6/11, invoice number 510-79908. If you got a good memory, you can memorize that. And then have a check request on the second page so that you can confirm your account number, department number, and class. Again, once everything's okay, we click approve. And that brings us back to the invoice that we skipped. And so if you go to the home page, you can, well, it takes a few minutes to update, but this would say one bill. And so you can go back through your slideshow approval whenever you're ready. And, once you have the information, you see everything's okay, you just select approve. And so there you are, you're done with the approval process. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the approval process before we move on? I'm going to show you how to view invoices and payments all in just one location. In the event that you get any questions, you'll know where to go to answer those. But before we move on, I want to see if you have any more questions. Also, I'll pause just a minute and let you.
How does this platform work on a smartphone.
I couldn't
So
hear
you can go to the App Store for iPhone or the Google Play Store for an Android phone and download the Bill.com app. It works very similarly. Instead of clicking buttons, you actually swipe left, right, up, or down. The one thing that is a little bit harder to see on a tablet or a phone is the actual invoice image, because the coding box today is sort of superimposed on it. So you may have to move that coding box out of the way or minimize it in the app to be able to look at the invoice and then pull that coding box open again, because your approvals actually happen, I think, in the app using the coding box as well. The one thing I will say about using the app, typically, at least what my iPhone does when I load a new app onto it, is it automatically sets all notifications to on for that app. And the next thing I know is I'm being notified about everything under the sun. So whether I want to be or not. So just be careful if you do choose to download the app and use it, that you turn your notifications off, or you're going to be getting notified about just about everything that's happening in Phoenix House in Bill.com, which I don't think you may want to have happen. So what we will do after this call is send out, we've got a little FAQ for how to use the mobile app for Bill.com. So we'll go ahead and send that out to you guys. So you have it in case you want to do this through a mobile application. I did want to add two more things here before we move on to the next topic. So the first thing I wanted to say is you would have noticed that in all the examples we showed you, all of the check request forms actually had signatures on them. Well, the process that we're training you all to do today is going to actually replace those signature boxes. So starting some point next week, once the communication comes out from Susan, and Anthony, what's going to happen is that the check request is going to come through along with the invoice, but there will be no signatures on the check request form. We will now be collecting the signatures through this invoice approval process. And so where typically you would have signed off on a check request form to approve a particular invoice, you will now be providing that approval in Bill.com. So I just want to let you know, so when you start seeing those check requests come through without signatures, it's not because that's wrong. It's because the signature approval process has now been replaced with an approval process in Bill.com. Everybody clear on that? Okay, Terry, if you want to move on to the next topic.
Okay. All right. So to view vendors, you would click on payables, click on vendor, and then you see that you have vendors A through Z. The quickest way to get to your vendor if someone calls and asks you about something would be to type it in, because as you can see, Phoenix House has a lot of vendors. So the quickest way to do this would be to type in Coastal, the name of your client. So I'm going to use Coastal Secure. And then you click on the search engine here, and it will bring you up to the vendor. Click on vendor, and it opens up. The first set of information that you'll see is the information that we have on the client, on the vendor. I mean, when we received the invoice, we set up this information. So we have their address, tax ID, phone number, and all the information that we need with the clients. And if we move on down, we have a bill here. So if you wanted to look at the bill, you would click on the invoice number and it would open it up. But before I do that, I just want to point out to everyone that Anything that you see in blue at any time in Bill.com, you can click on it and drill down and see more information. So just remember that if it's blue, you can drill down on it. So you can open it up. Maybe a vendor's called you asking you about some questions. Maybe you issued this bill. And it has, we're going to pretend this one's been paid, and we set it up for $85, but they said, it should have been $185. So you can open this up and review the invoice and go, I'm sorry, but the invoice we received says only $85, whatever the case is. The point is that you can see the information here regarding the invoice, and you also what it means now that when it has an approver that that Susie has approved this bill and that we're waiting on Nisha. Of course, I don't know that that's information that you would want to give to the vendor, but the point is hopefully after going through the approval process and stuff, you know how to read this invoice in its entirety. You can see the invoice number, the invoice date. We have it marked about that it's due upon receipt, and at this present time it is unpaid and it's still going through the approval process. So the way to get back to the screen is this left arrow here will take you back. Another feature
so,
that I
Terry,
want.
could you hold there
go ahead.
for a second?
Sure.
Thank you. So just to add to what Terry said, so the first section obviously gives you all the information we have about that vendor on file. If you need to make a change to that vendor, you need to submit a vendor change request form, similar to what was being done at Phoenix House previously, so there is no change to that process. And that vendor change form needs to be submitted to phoenixhouse@bill.com, and we'll take care of making the changes to the vendor for you. Terry, could you page down a second? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so just even if you don't want to click on the invoice like Terry showed us to actually look at the invoice image, you could simply look at this line of data for that particular invoice, and it gives you some pretty good information. So right away you can see the invoice number, you can see when the invoice is due to be paid, or is due, the payment due date is. You can see the account that invoice was coded to. You can see the amount. And then to the very right, you can see status and approval status. A status of unpaid essentially means the invoice hasn't been paid yet. And an approval status of approving means that the invoice is actually sitting in somebody's queue waiting to be approved. And then, of course, if you click on the invoice number itself and drill down, that little coding box comes up with the approver queue, so you know right away where that invoice is stuck in the approval queue. While statuses are important for you all to understand what each status means, the key ones really are if something is in an approving status, which is an APPROVING status, means it's waiting in somebody's queue to be approved. If a status is approved with an ED at the end, that means that invoice has gone through the approval process and is now waiting to be paid, and will either be picked up in a daily payment run, or if that invoice is not due for a couple more weeks, then will be picked up to be paid closer to its due date. Other statuses that are in the system that you may see, a status of denied means that somebody actually denied an invoice at some point in their approval process, and that invoice is now waiting to be corrected by the processor and resubmitted for approvals. You may see a status of assigned, and what that means is that the invoice is actually being coded and will be routed for approval as soon as the coding is finished. And you may see a status of unassigned, which means that the invoice has just come into the inbox and will be picked up shortly for processing. So those are the basic statuses. The ones that you're primarily concerned with is if you see something in an approving status, that means it's waiting in somebody's queue. And if you see something in an approved status but not paid or unpaid, that means the invoice is ready to be paid and will be picked up in a payment run. So just wanted to quickly share that with you as well. You'll see there's a little show all button right there that Terry's clicking on. Now this particular vendor has only one invoice, but for example, if you say Terry typed in Staples in our vendor search box, Staples has many invoices, and what you would actually see is all of those invoices listed. So Terry, if you want to quickly go up to the top, type in Staples. So we're going to search for Staples as a vendor and click on the vendor link, page down. And what you see here are the first 5 invoices, but if I click on show all, it's going to show me all the invoices you've got in the system for Staples. Now, and this is, we're obviously in the training environment, so there aren't that many. But in the production environment, which is where you guys will be doing your approvals, we've got hundreds of Staples invoices. Now, unfortunately, we're not able to group or display those invoices by company. So if you are looking for a particular Staples invoice, it would probably help to have the invoice number or the invoice amount, just so you can go through and find that invoice a bit faster. Okay, can we go back, Terry? Thank you. And then if you go down, you'll see a section called Payments. Now, typically in this section, when an invoice is paid, what you will see is a record here with a payment confirmation number that you can further drill down on. That gives you the invoice, the check number, the check date, when the check is due to reach the vendor, and if the check has cleared, an image of the cleared check will all be available when you click on that payment confirmation link. And then it gives you other information about the invoice saying, yep, this one's been paid. Now you may have a situation where you are paying multiple invoices on one check. Clicking on that payment link will also give you the list of invoices that was paid through that check, and you'll have the ability to click on those invoice numbers and drill down to the invoice detail through that link as well. So all of these links, all invoice number links, send you back to the same place in Bill.com, which is the invoice image and the associated coding data with it. So that becomes a very useful tool when you're trying to figure out if something has been paid or not. The section in the bill section above the status would turn to paid, and then you should be able to find an associated payment record for that bill in the payment section. And then pull that up, click on the payment confirmation link, and be able to find out payment details about that particular invoice. And this becomes really handy when you've got a vendor on the phone saying, hey, I never got paid. Where's my $200,000 check? You can come right here, pull up the vendor, and find out everything you need to about that particular invoice and that particular payment. And again, the show all button in the payment section does exactly what it did in the bill section, which is if you've made more than one payment to a vendor, it will list all the payments ever made through Bill.com for that vendor in that section. Any questions or comments? Thoughts? Can folks still hear us? I know a lot of folks are on mute, so if you are trying to speak, we can't hear you unless you unmute yourself. Can everybody still hear us?
Yes.
Okay. It got super quiet there for a second, so I was just wondering. All right, Terry, anything else to cover or add?
Just in closing on the vendor credits and documents, those two work the same way. If there's any credits, they're going to appear here. If they've been used on any invoices that are listed above or under the Show All button, you will be able to click on it and see which invoices the vendor credits were used on. And then last, any documents shared about this vendor, maybe we, receiving monthly statements from this vendor, they're going to be filed here attached so that you can, again, they'll be in blue. You click on it, you can open up the statement and see if it, coincides with the unpaid bills that are in the approving process are waiting to be paid. So each section works the same, but the cool, neat thing is that you don't have to go to 4 or 5 different places. Everything about this vendor is under the vendor name. So again, where we started, you just simply type in the name of the vendor and click on the search button, and it will bring this up. So it's just neat to have it all in one place. So that concludes the training session today, but we still have some time for any questions or comments that you may have. Please feel free to speak up.
If I were to go on vacation, how does one substitute a authorized person?
Okay, so there is no way to substitute them automatically in the system. What you need to do is send an email to Susie Colburn at bdo.com and let her know what dates you're going to be out and who your authorized approver is in your absence, and we'll make sure that for the period that you're not there, that invoices won't be routed to your queue, but will be routed to the person you designate in your absence. And Susie's email address is S as in Sam, Colburn, Colburn at bdo.com.
Do we have any more questions? We still have a little bit of time.
Okay, and just as a reminder, we did record this session, and as soon as the session is over, I will send this file over to Susan, and Anthony, who can then have that distributed to the appropriate folks that might need it. So if there are no other questions, just wanted to say thank you very much for joining, and we hope this training was useful. If you do have any follow-up questions or need any clarification, please reach out to me. I'm Nisha or Terry, and we'll be glad to answer those for you. So thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.